I greet the loving earth beneath our feet. I greet the stars in the sky, the moonlight in all her quiet patience. And I greet you, dear listener. You honor me with the gift of your company this night. Congratulations for making it through another day. Whether you come tired, restless, or curious, the night has made space for you. If what we create here together resonates with you, feel free to like and subscribe, or simply say hello in your native tongue and tell me where you have joined me from, so that I myself may look up in the night and know we all bathe in the same moonlight. And if the stories I tell come from your family, your town, your lineage, your people, I beg, forgive my tongue if I miss any words. And know that I speak them with careful respect for the cultures that kept them alive. And just between us, I know someone who lives where roads meet. Not in the middle of the road, not at the end of the road, but at the soft point where one path becomes two. And if your thoughts have been arguing with each other today, if one part of you says go left and another part of you says go right, then you are already standing in his territory. Eshu. Tonight we are going to sit with him as he is remembered in Yoruba cosmology. Not as a loud troublemaker, not as a villain in a simple story, but as a mediator, a translator, a keeper of thresholds. And we will do it the way elders often do it, with stories, with objects that carry meaning, with calm repetition. So hold a small picture, an earth path at night, not paved, just a quiet seam in the ground. And where the path splits, there is a low stone, red-brown like dried clay, Laterite. Not a dramatic shrine, just a marker that says, here is a place where choices happen. Before we begin, notice your breath, in and out. You do not have to force it into a pattern. It already knows how to travel. It arrives, and it returns. And now, with that simple rhythm, we open the way. In Yoruba thought, the universe is often spoken of as two great spaces, Orun and Ahye, the spirit realm and the living world, the unseen and the seen, and between them there is distance. Not only distance of miles, distance of language, distance of intention, distance of misunderstanding. And if the world is going to function, something has to cross that distance. Words must arrive, prayers must arrive, offerings must arrive, and consequences too must arrive. Eshu is one of the names given to that crossing. He is the one who stands where things pass through. And that is why, in many accounts, people speak of addressing him first. Not because he is greedy, but because he is the gate, and you do not walk into a compound without acknowledging the door. Some people call him Eshu Elegba. Others speak of him as the owner of the crossroads, Onile Orita. And a crossroads in these stories is not only a place where roads meet. It is a place where meanings meet. And so our first story begins with a simple object, a cap. There are two friends, not casual friends, the kind of friends who have shared water in the heat, the kind of friends who know each other's footsteps. They boast of their bond. They say nothing can come between them. And when a story wants to teach gently, it often begins with a boast. Because a boast is a door left open. So one day, as the men are working on their farms, a stranger walks on the path between their fields. He does not rush. He does not shout. He greets each man as he passes. And on his head is a cap that is red on one side and black on the other. The first friend sees the red side. The red looks complete. It looks like the whole truth. The second friend sees the black side. The black looks complete. It looks like the whole truth. Later, when the work is done, they speak about the stranger. One says, "Did you see the man in the red cap?" The other says, "Red." "No, it was black." At first it is just a disagreement, the kind that could be corrected by laughter. But pride tightens, and certainty becomes a weapon. Each man insists that his eyes must be the only eyes. Each man insists that his angle must be the whole world. And so the disagreement becomes accusation. And accusation becomes insult. And insult becomes a quarrel that shocks even them. In some tellings, elders are called. In some tellings, they go before a king. And in the end, the stranger appears again. He turns his head, and the cap shows both sides, red and black. And the lesson lands softly. Both men were right, and both men were foolish. Not because they saw wrong, but because they refused to imagine a truth with two faces. If you let this story sit quietly in your mind, you can feel what it is really teaching. It is not teaching you to win arguments. It is teaching you to walk around the object, to ask, what might the other person be seeing? And that is a crossroads skill. And now, because this is a story tradition that loves objects, we follow the cap into its meanings. Red and black return again and again in the archive of Eshu, not as good and evil, but as forces that live together. Red as heat, motion, change. Black as depth, mystery, consequence. And when a story places them on one cap, it is reminding you that the world is rarely one color at a time. So now we step away from the farms and we walk toward another crossroads, the market. The Yoruba market is often called Oja, and an Oja is a crossroads made of voices. It is a place where value is negotiated with words, where people agree, where they disagree, where they bargain, where they remember old debts. And because words move quickly in a market, meaning can slip. So in many accounts, Eshu is remembered near the gate of the market, not to cause chaos, but to make ethics visible. Because it is in a market that you learn how a person treats the truth. Does the seller hide stones under yams? Does the buyer promise to pay and then forget? Does someone speak sweetly while doing something sharp? These are not only business problems. They are social problems. They weaken the cloth of the community. And now we come to an item that carries a lot of memory. Cowrie shells. Small pale shells like tiny sleeping mouths, once used as currency, counted, stored, traded. When a story places cowries near Eshu, it is linking him to exchange, to value, to the way a spoken agreement becomes a lived reality. And cowries also link us to divination, to counting patterns, to reading a scatter on a tray the way you read footprints on a road. Now we come gently to Ifa. Ifa is not a single prediction. It is a library of guidance, stories and sayings that treat life as something you navigate. And in many accounts, Eshu is tied to this library as the one who makes the message land. Because a reading is not only information, it is also a responsibility. And if responsibility is going to travel from the oracle to the person, it needs a messenger. In some accounts, you will hear the name Orun, the witness of destiny, the keeper of the Ifa corpus. And you may hear about Odu, patterns, chapters of a vast book. One of those chapters is sometimes spoken of as Oshe Otura, and in some tellings, Eshu is born in that pattern. We do not need to turn it into a technical lecture tonight. We only need the simple bedtime lesson. That knowledge is not complete until it is carried properly. And now we move to another story. This one is sometimes told as a story of cleverness. But if we tell it slowly, it becomes a story about logistics. In some tellings, there is a high garden, rows of yams sleeping under the soil, the kind of order that feels permanent. And Eshu takes one yam, just one, not to starve anyone, but to test the boundary. And then he arranges the evidence so that the theft points back at the owner. Footprints that suggest the owner took from himself. The owner is annoyed, but the owner also recognizes a talent. Because not everyone understands how boundaries work. Not everyone knows how a message slips. Not everyone can move between spaces without getting lost. And so, in these tellings, the annoyance becomes an appointment. Go, carry, report, translate. And in this way, the story suggests something calm. That the universe is not only built by power. It is built by roles, by responsibility, by someone making sure the message arrives. And now, because Eshu is a crossroads, his stories often touch the sky. There are tellings in which the sun and the moon do not keep their schedule. They trade places. They overlap. They disagree about whose turn it is to stand above the world. And the result is not horror. It is confusion. Plants do not know when to open. People do not know when to rest. And in some of these accounts, Eshu is present as the spark that reveals the problem. Not because he hates order, but because order must be negotiated. Order must be chosen. And then wisdom intervenes. Divination speaks. Times are assigned. The sun is given its hours. The moon is given hers, and the rhythm returns. If you are listening at night, this is a kindness, because it says even the sky can be unsettled and then gently settled again. Now we return to the earth, to stones, to doorways. Laterite appears again in Eshu lore as a simple anchor, a red-brown stone, not fancy, not expensive. It reminds you that choices are grounded, that the crossroads is not floating in the air. It is in the dust your feet stir. And then there is another object that follows Eshu through museum catalogues and ritual stories. A staff, an ogo. We do not have to picture it as a weapon tonight. We can picture it as a tool, carved wood, held in the hand. And in that image is a calm rule. Power is a tool, and tools require discipline. When you hear about offerings in this tradition, you may hear the word ebo. An offering is not only payment, it is communication. It is a way of saying, I have come carefully. And in many accounts, Eshu is described as the one who checks whether the offering is sincere, whether the person has followed the condition of the road, whether the intention is clean. Because the road has rules, and the crossroads keeps them. Now we come to a gentle but important note. Eshu has been misunderstood. In colonial translations, he was often mapped onto the Christian devil. And once that mapping happened, many people stopped listening to the older logic. They heard devil and imagined absolute evil. But that is not how the stories hold him. In Yoruba accounts, he is a principle that makes accountability real. He makes hypocrisy expensive. He makes careless promises return to you. Not as a curse for its own sake, but as a lesson that keeps the community from falling apart. And now, because stories travel, we drift across the Atlantic. Names change. Languages change. Ritual calendars change. But the function of the gatekeeper often remains. In Cuba, many people speak of Elegua, a keeper of doors and roads, often addressed first like a key turned in a lock. In Brazil, you may hear Exu, and you may hear debates, because history there also carried demonizing language and later carried reclamation. And in Haiti, many people speak of Papa Legba, an elder gatekeeper who opens the way to other Lua. It is important to say this carefully. These figures overlap strongly in function. They do not always match perfectly in lineage. Legba has deep Bayfon roots in West Africa. Eshu is Yoruba, and the Atlantic made them neighbors in the same hard history. So if you want a gentle bedtime image of the connection, you can picture this. A long road over water, boats, wind, names carried in mouths that were forced to learn new languages. And at the end of that road, new doorways, new rituals, new gatekeepers who still open the way. Now we return to the quiet junction where we began. The path is still. The lantern is low. The Laterite stone holds its patient color. And if your mind comes to a crossroads again tonight, you do not have to panic. You can pause. You can breathe. You can choose slowly. Because that is the deepest lesson hidden inside these stories. Not that life is confusing, but that life is plural, and plural things can be held gently. And if sleep is already arriving for you, you can let it arrive. You can rest now. But if you are still awake, if your mind is still walking its small circles, then we can stay at the crossroads a little longer. Because the crossroads is not only a single story, it is a whole shelf of stories. So let us take a slow walk around the junction, not to look for danger, only to notice details. Notice the ground first, how it holds footprints, how it keeps record without speaking. In this tradition, the ground is never only ground. It is a witness. Now notice the doorway of a house nearby. In Yoruba, you may hear Ile, the home. The doorway is a small crossroads, inside and outside, private and public, safe and unknown. And now notice the simplest objects people use to mark a threshold. A stone, a small bowl, a few cowries. In Yoruba thinking, those objects are not decoration. They are agreements. They say, I know I am passing through a place where passing matters. And now, because we have walked around the junction once, we can tell another story. There are many ways people describe what Eshu does. One way is this. He makes sure the message matches the messenger. Because sometimes the problem is not the message. It is the way it is carried. Imagine a person who goes to consult Ifa. They want guidance. They want a clear road. And the oracle speaks gently. It says, slow down, repair a promise, return a debt, make an offering. And the person nods because nodding is easy. And over time they go home and do nothing. They keep the debt, they keep the lie, they keep the sharpness in the pocket of their speech. And then later they complain. Why did the guidance not work? In Yoruba accounts, this is where Eshu appears as the quiet enforcer of conditions. Not because he loves punishment, but because a road has rules. And when you ignore the rules, you are not being cursed. You are simply meeting consequence. You can hold that as a bedtime thought. Consequence is not always anger. Sometimes it is just reality returning the shape of what you sent. And now, because we have spoken about conditions, we can speak softly about offerings. Abo. An offering can be as simple as acknowledging. As simple as sharing a small portion before you eat. As simple as remembering that you did not make yourself alone. In some homes, people pour a small libation to the earth, not for spectacle, just a quiet gesture. And the quiet gesture is a kind of gate. It opens the way for gratitude. It opens the way for humility. Now, let us return to the famous Kep story for a moment, but in a slower, wider way. Because that story is not only about two men arguing, it is also about language. The world is full of sentences that have two sides. One side is what you say. The other side is what you mean. And between those two sides, misunderstandings grow like grass. This is why scholars sometimes call Eshu a figure of interpretation, because he stands where meaning slips, and he makes the slip visible. If you have ever replayed a conversation at night, if you have ever wondered, did they mean it that way? Did I hear it wrong? Then you already know the quiet territory of Eshu. And since we are here, let us practice a softer version of the cap lesson. Imagine taking the sentence you are stuck on and walking around it, turning it, seeing it from another angle. You do not have to decide what it means tonight. You only have to admit it might have more than one face. And now we can tell a story that is sometimes used to explain why people speak of Eshu as many. Some lineages and retellings speak of many paths, many versions, many presences. Sometimes you will hear a number like 201. We can carry the meaning without carrying the sharpness. We can say it this way: Eshu is one, and he is also many. Because the crossroads is one idea, and it is also everywhere. Every time you choose, every time you translate, every time you carry a message. And that is why it makes sense that stories describe him as multiplied, not as a horror, as a practical metaphor. Now let us do another slow inventory, the way bedtime stories often do. Not an inventory of objects for its own sake, an inventory of thresholds. The gate of a market, the doorway of a home, the edge of a farm path, the moment before you speak, the moment after you speak. Each one is a place where Eshu can be remembered. And now, to deepen the market image, we can return to Cowries one more time. Imagine someone counting Cowries. 1, 2, 3. Not quickly. Slowly. Counting is calming because it is a road with clear steps. And when a person counts carefully, they are practicing the ethics Eshu is said to guard. Do not cheat. Do not rush. Do not pretend you did not see what you saw. Now we drift again, just briefly, to Papa Legba. Many people picture him as an elder with a cane, keys at his belt in some images, a hat, a slow step. Even if the genealogies differ, the bedtime feeling is similar. That someone stands at the gate and someone opens it. And now, very gently, we close the circle again. We return to the quiet crossroads. The lantern is low. The dust is settled. The laterite stone is warm-colored even in the dark. And this time, we do not hurry to the end. We let the image repeat. We let it become a lullaby. And if sleep is already arriving for you, you can let it arrive. You can rest now. But if you are still awake, we can stay with the crossroads a little longer. Because the stories of Eshu are not one story. They are a braid. And each strand in the braid is a small lesson about how life moves. So we will keep the same calm picture in front of us. The junction in the dust, the Laterite stone, the lantern held low. And we will add stories to it slowly, the way a night adds hours to itself. In many communities, people say that you do not begin a long conversation without greeting the gate. And a gate can be big. The entrance to a town, the entrance to a market, the entrance to a compound. And a gate can be small. The moment before you speak, the moment before you promise, the moment before you choose. So we will take our time and build a calm understanding of what it means to open the way. And over time, you may notice something. The crossroads does not demand that you hurry. It only asks that you be honest about where you are standing. So now let us return to the first famous story and widen it. Because the cap story is often told quickly. And when it is told quickly, it can sound like it is only about conflict. But in calmer tellings, it is also about friendship as a practice. Picture the two friends again. Their farms do not touch by accident. Their farms touch because they chose to be neighbors. And neighbors in many villages are not just people who live nearby. Neighbors are emergency plans. Neighbors are shared water when a well goes dry. Neighbors are shared hands when a roof needs repair. So when a story tests friendship, it is testing a whole social safety net. And the cap in this wider reading is not just a trick. It is a demonstration of how fragile a community becomes when people refuse to imagine each other's angle. You can see this in small everyday ways. Two people watch the same event, and each remembers it differently. Two siblings hear the same sentence from a parent, and each carries a different meaning into adulthood. So in the cap story, Eshu is not only laughing. He is holding up a mirror. He is showing that certainty can be an illness of the eye. And after the mirror comes the gentle repair. In some tellings, the friends apologize. In some tellings, elders speak to them. In some tellings, they pour water and they make peace. And the point is not humiliation. The point is the return of the bond. It is worth noting that Yoruba stories often include these quiet repair gestures. Water poured on the earth. Food shared again. Words said plainly. Because a community survives not by never breaking, but by knowing how to mend. And now we can follow the cap into a small color series. Red, black. In some tellings, red is the heat of life, the blood in the wrist, the pepper on the tongue, the quickness of a decision made in anger. And black is the depth of night, the inside of a closed pot, the shade under a tree at noon, the silence that arrives after a crowd goes home. And when a story binds red and black together, it is reminding you that life is not one temperature. Some days are hot with decisions. Some days are cool with waiting. And wisdom is knowing when to be which. Now, because we have spoken of color, we can move to cloth. In many Yoruba homes, cloth is not only clothing. Cloth is memory. Cloth is status. Cloth is the way an identity sits on the skin. And in the nighttime style of this project, cloth is also a calming texture. Picture a folded cloth with a muted red-black seam. No bright color, only the suggestion. And let the cloth become a quiet metaphor. The world is stitched together, not always smoothly, but with seams. And a seam is a kind of crossroads, two pieces meeting, held together by thread. And now, to keep the lower braid moving, we return to the market. The market is not only commerce, it is news. It is marriage arrangements spoken quietly. It is old friends meeting again after distance. And because it is speech heavy, it is also a place where meaning can slip. In some accounts, people leave a small gesture at the entrance of the market. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a sign that says, I am entering a place where words have weight. And now we come to a shell series. Cowrie shells. It is worth noting that a cowrie looks like a small closed mouth. And in a story about speech, that matters. The shell was once money, so it carries the memory of counting. And counting is a calm ritual. 1, 2, 3. And when money is counted, honesty is tested. And when honesty is tested, a shoe is nearby in the story logic. The shell is also used in forms of divination. Not because shells are magical objects by themselves, but because a scatter is a language, and reading a scatter is a way of listening. And here we can do a micro recap the way the guides recommend. So far, we have stayed at the same crossroads. We have watched a cap split truth into angles. We have watched a market turn speech into value. We have watched a shell become a mouth that remembers counting. And now we can add another story strand. Because in some tellings, Eshu is also remembered as a traveler between worlds. Not as a bird, not as lightning, but as a messenger who knows every doorway. We have already told the yam story once, so we can tell it again, but in a softer, more detailed way. Picture the yam as an ordinary food. Heavy in the hand, cool to the touch, dusty skin. The yam is not only food. In many West African stories, the yam is also the symbol of stored work, months of farming, weeding, waiting. So when a yam is taken, the story is saying that effort has been moved. And the footprints in that story are also a lesson. Because footprints are a kind of evidence. and evidence depends on interpretation. So the yam story is another cap story in a different clothing. It says, be careful with what you think you know. Be careful with what you assume. And then in the calmer endings of that story, the appointment happens. Not a dramatic coronation, just a role given, a job, carry messages. And in that appointment, we can hear something very old, that the universe is run by logistics as much as by power. Now we can begin another series, one that will help us reach the deep soak length in a lore first way. The Doorway series. Picture a doorway at night, wood worn smooth by many hands, an iron latch that has been opened thousands of times. The doorway is an everyday crossroads. Outside is the public world. Inside is the private world. And in some Yoruba homes, people acknowledge that threshold in small ways. They sweep the entrance. They keep it clean. They repair it when it breaks. Because a doorway is where safety begins. And if you think of Eshu as the keeper of thresholds, you can see why doorways are part of his story world. And now we will pause here, not to end, only to let the picture settle. We are at the crossroads. We have not moved. We are only letting the archive open slowly. And as the archive opens, you may notice your own body becoming quieter. Because stories told this way do not demand attention. They only offer it. And so we continue. Before we let the road close for the night, we can add one more long braid from the oldest layer of the lore, where many earlier versions begin. And this braid belongs to the place before many calendars begin. There are many ways people learn about Eshu's age. One way is to begin with the roads. Another way is to begin with the Odu. Both ways lead to the same teacher if listened to calmly. In one teaching line, Eshu is associated with Odu Otura. And in that teaching, Odu Otura is not only a pattern in divination, it is a gate for the flow of all other patterns. When a practitioner sits for divination, the sequence has order. Not all sequences are loud, not all sequences are dramatic. Some are patient and repetitive. And in one description, Eshu is said to be born in this gate. That means the one who mediates between words and outcomes is also tied to the pattern that makes other patterns travel. This is a good place to remind how scholars differ. Some traditions name a number, others name a title. Some say this is a story of emergence from Odu. Others say it is a way of saying that Eshu sits at the center of initiation logic. In storytelling, we do not need to force one only. We can hold both as a map with two edges. And if a map has two edges, that is already a crossroads teaching. Because this very tension appears again and again in Eshu stories. One community says he is primordial, another says he is appointed, another says he is multiplied from a single appetite. And the deeper lesson is that Eshu appears in many ritual grammars. You can picture this visually as one room with several doors open. And this is why a crossroads deity can also be an initiation principle. Now imagine a quiet making room in the old narratives. The room has earth, clay, and intention, and the maker is asked to form a person, and only one intention is given. This person should be able to speak. That person, once formed, speaks immediately. Speaking is the sign, and then hunger becomes the next sign. Hunger not for one meal, for all things. Stories speak of a hunger that keeps moving. If this sounds difficult, let us slow it. Hungry as a child is one picture. Hungry as a force is another picture. And this second picture can look frightening until the listener remembers consequence. In the same stories, the boundary breaks, and that break is interpreted not as evil alone. It is interpreted as a reminder that appetite is powerful. That power must be given direction. And in some teachings, the intervention of Orunmila or Olodumare gives that direction. And not every text presents every step. But when the stories do continue, they often end at the same place. Discipline appears and mediation becomes possible. So the figure that was too wide for one body can become many presences. And this gives us the number tradition, 201 paths in some accounts. If you meet another account with 256, that can stay as original grammar. Neither forces the other to disappear. One path, two path, many path language can remain a single teaching. What changed is not the ethics. The ethics are still this. Somewhere between thought and consequence is the root people forget. And if you are still awake, this is a peaceful place for the first micro recap. We have moved from threshold stories into primordial beginnings. We have touched Odu as the source and as gate. We have met hunger as power requiring measure, and we are preparing to move into more local, concrete symbols. Now we shift to the clay figure motif once again, because the same teaching appears with different texture. In that motif, an elder divine figure is asked to form a person from earth, and this person speaks quickly, which is both gift and warning. Then comes the line where hunger crosses the edge of kingship. Eshu is described as crossing from a child who can speak into a force that consumes without limit, and the story turns sharp only if the listener only looks for scandal. So we keep it gentle and do not stay with the edge. We treat that edge as a metaphor for unaided desire. The force of desire is not evil by default. It is energy without measure, and measure is the reason for ethics. In the narrative, someone intervenes and limits the excess, and the result is not annihilation. The result is the possibility of ritual accountability. This is why these stories are often told in the same breath as sacrifice. And then a related item arrives as teaching Laterite. Not because Laterite has no memory, because it is not only stone, because it can hold and show repeated touch. If we say this in bedtime terms, Laterite is the earth that agrees to remember your step. In one research-linked tradition, Laterite is tied to Eshu Agbaru, not because one account is final, because this is one tradition's way to explain why crossroads can be marked with earth color and not gold. And the earth does not advertise, it darkens, it erodes, it keeps the shape of passing. So the lore door for Laterite is simple. You can stand in a place and not be noticed, and even then the earth has recorded that place. Remember the item rule for bedtime lore. When we mention Laterite, we add its behavior. Laterite cools the eye. Laterite anchors the road. Laterite reminds that every crossing is material before it is cosmic. Now we can add one more long story thread from the research around the Onile Orita teaching. The word means builder of houses at crossings, and it names a social role with architecture inside it, not only a divine role. The role says communities build meaning by choosing where to place boundaries. In a village, the most stable houses and the most unstable relationships are both shaped by thresholds. The doorway is not a decoration. The doorway is an ethic. Who passes and how they pass, whether they greet, whether they carry hidden intention. That is why one can understand Onile Orita as a reminder. A crossroads is social engineering at human scale. The god stands there so the village remembers to engineer transitions with care. Now we return to the messenger idea because this title appears at the same seam. In many accounts, Eshu is said to be the one with access to all divine chords and the supreme being, not because he sits above all, because he passes through all lanes. That is the difference. The messenger is also an auditor. The messenger hears what is said with attention and checks the condition behind saying and asks, was this offered with honesty? If a gift is carried with one intention and spoken with another, the road does not become simple. It becomes resistant, not always with lightning, often with delay, with misalignment, with small friction, and friction in stories is usually where teaching happens. This is why some communities place Eshu before other deities in ceremony, not out of superstition, out of practical process. If the door is not opened correctly, the house cannot be entered without noise. As we hold this, we can add the yam and slippers motif in slower detail. The high one owns abundance. The messenger steals one yams, not to feed hunger alone, to test the logic of ownership and attention. Then comes the crafted confusion of footprints. The higher being is briefly unsettled. That unsettled state is often interpreted as a pedagogical fault line rather than pure cruelty. Because after that confusion comes a reassignment, and the reassignment is not punishment as horror, it is placement. The message is this: if you carry cunning, let it become responsibility. If you carry speed, let it become accurate work. If you carry silence, let it become listening. That pattern appears in several markets and courts. The same force that can create confusion can create administration. And this is why Eshu remains morally ambivalent only if viewed from one angle. From a different angle, he is protocol. And because this can feel abstract, we return to household things: the clay bowl, the small cup of water, the bowl of oil, the little plate at a threshold. Each object can be an offering, but only if the act matches the object. So, if a person puts down a bowl in the morning and then leaves without apology for a wrong word, the bowl was not the real offering. The real offering was missing. This is a bedside way to tell the same old point. Ritual and ethics are not parallel tracks. They are one road with one set of markings. Now, we can return to the myth cycle around the sun and moon without raising tension. One story says there was conflict in the sky. Sun and moon contested timing. And what is the lesson for a sleepy listener? Even cycles can drift when communication fails, and then community calls for a schedule. The idea of schedule is not simply cosmic, it is ethical, because if the schedule is broken at home, sleep becomes unrest, meals become late, work becomes brittle, trust becomes thin. So when Eshu appears near solar imagery, he is not only celestial mischief, he is a teacher for time, time that belongs to everyone, even when people ignore it. Now we have room for one item cluster often underrepresented. The Ogo staff. The staff is carved. It can bear power imagery, sometimes warriors, sometimes figures, sometimes unusual hairstyles. It is walked with, not worshipped as wood alone. Its movement helps the body remember intention. In some lineages, the staff is linked to ceremonies and dance. In others, it is held in still space as support. Either way, the lore is similar. Power in hand requires care in heart. The staff is often called a wand in translation, but in oral teaching, it is closer to a disciplined walking line. With every step, one says, "Do not wield force carelessly." Another object cluster, the Cowrie. We have spoken of value, but here is the full layer. Cowries were used in counting and exchange. They now appear at thresholds because they encode relation between sound and worth. In divinatory contexts, Cowries are used in Merindin Logan. The shields are not random. They are a physical score of possible responses, and they teach that uncertainty can be read respectfully. So when a Cowrie appears near a doorway in a story, treat it like this. The mouth it suggests is not for quick speech. It is for speech measured by accountability. In addition to cowries and staff, we can add black and red cloth motifs in fuller context. Red in Yoruba ritual language can be seen as active movement. Black can be depth, rest, hidden roots. Both are present together because roads have heat and shade. If you hear black and red described as dangerous, you can correct that tone. They are not danger signals. They are reminders that meaning has two faces. Sometimes white appears too to calm or to seal, not as a replacement, as one extra note in a storybook that has many pages. One more recap. We have now touched Odu, primordial hunger, Onile Orita, Mediator as messenger, Yam story, Laterite, sun and moon, and the material objects. All of these stay on the same road. Now we go to the historical distortion strand carefully. Many people first learn Eshu as a devil. That learning came through translations and dictionaries that mapped local categories onto foreign fear frames. That mapping was durable, and durable mappings become inherited thought. In one documented case, the dictionary made this map explicit. Eshu as Satan. For people who had never met a Yoruba shrine, this sounded like final proof. The final proof became social distance. Now think of this as a practical example. If a person says, "Na devil do they sometimes place their choice outside themselves. This phrase can soothe guilt for a moment, but it can also weaken self-ownership. In a bedtime ethics frame, we can gently reframe it. We do not remove the reality of consequence. We return consequence to the person, and we return responsibility to daily action. This reframe is not blameful if it is slow. It is restorative if it lets people act. The figure then becomes one who teaches, not one who excuses. This is where modern reclaiming appears. When people relearn the older framing, they are not adding a new superstition. They are restoring a broken pronoun. That pronoun says, "This principle governs my choices, not my blame." Now, as requested, we return to diaspora links in a fuller map. In Cuban lineages, especially Lukumi, Elegua or Elegua appears in many homes and initiation systems. The domestic door is where this becomes concrete. The threshold is repeated each day. The figure can be at the entrance, in the routine, not only on ceremonial night. One practical consequence is that Elegua is often approached in a language shaped by Cuban liturgy and by Santeria discipline. Cowrie-lined heads, house shrines, syncretized saint names, and everyday opening prayers can all be part of the same night routine. Another consequence is that some traditions make a distinction. Elegua and Ichu, one more domestic, one more untamed. Some communities keep this distinction clear. Some keep it as a soft spectrum. In either case, the point is that function and pedagogy can diverge within one family. Now we drift across the water again to Brazil. Here, the name Exu becomes multiple. In one religious current, Exu remains an Òrìṣà-like mediator in close relation to initiation and opening work. In another, especially in some Umbanda contexts, the category becomes one layer among spirit lineages with internal debates about morality and aesthetics. In yet another line, popular or external imagination turns that category into a villain-like image. That is where scholarship notes modern correction, not instant but uneven. For our bedtime map, we keep this simple. Language can become polluted by fear and then repaired by practice. If you hear Ixu Mayoral or other modern hard labels, we keep the principle even here. Different lineages are not the same path. Context is the map key. Now to Haiti and Legba. This is a crucial comparison and must stay gentle. Both figures can open roads and guard thresholds, but one is rooted in Fongan lineages of Vodun in West Africa, and the other in Yoruba cosmologies and the transformations. Legba's iconographic language in some Haitian contexts is different. Straw hat, cane, limp, and doorway symbolism are often emphasized as household metaphors. The limp can be read as both earth and beyond earth stance, one foot in a visible village, one in spirit continuity. You can hold this as a useful bedtime sentence. A gate can look different in different houses. The gate still opens only when terms are respected. In some lineages, there is also the idea of Kalfu or Carrefour, and this points to plural forms inside a single category. Plural forms should not be treated as contradiction. They are practical branches around one threshold role. Now, if you travel to New Orleans lineages, you may see renewed forms that combine Legba ideas with broader revival cultures. There, tourism, migration, and memory can shape visible ritual language, so it can look new while carrying old functions. The wise listener notices what is consistent and what is staged. This is not skepticism as a rejection. It is discernment as care, and discernment belongs to the same Eshu principle of speech and conditions. Now we can braid this diaspora comparison back into practical ethics. If a door figure appears different in Cuba, Brazil, or Haiti, do not flatten, do not compare only by image. Compare what the figure does. Does it open roads? Does it mediate speech? Does it keep obligations visible? If yes, then you are in a convergent threshold logic. If not, then keep listening for local origin. This brings us to another important item to carry from one more research line: sacrifice and EBO. An EBO is not a bribe. It is a structured offering that aligns behavior, time, and speech. When offered with vanity, it is noise. When offered with responsibility, it is a map correction. Common gifts include palm wine, rum, palm oil, coffee, maize, beans, and shared food. Not all houses use all items, but each item points to economy and relation. Animal sacrifice in some lineages appears with goat, rooster, or other forms. Our bedtime framing avoids graphic focus. What matters is intention and timing. You offer not because of fear, but because action must take form. Taboos around these acts vary. One person may be advised not to approach with arrogance. Another may be advised to keep offering simple before sleep. The shared point is respect. Here is a practical bedtime example. Someone brings a small bottle of rum. They speak of respect, but they speak harshly to a neighbor. The bottle is visible. The harm is still in the speech. The instruction says, correct the speech or the gift remains unbalanced. This is why an elder can say, Eshu is a policeman of ethics and not a monster of chaos. The policeman image is not punitive as punishment. It is custodial. It protects the road so many can travel. Let us return to the crossroads image now in a domestic scale. Imagine an entrance to a compound after sunset. The ground is brushed, one small lamp near a worn post, a few objects arranged close together, and the night remains unbothered. At that entrance, three things happen when practice works well. People greet, people keep promises, people repair quickly. The deity does not need to be feared in that scene. It just needs to be acknowledged. Now we can do one long micro-story to hold this teaching in the same gentle voice. There is a small line of people in one neighborhood. An elder says every house that opens only for profit closes itself to peace. The elder says every house that opens for attention becomes a road. The story has no villains, only missed opportunities. In this story, a woman from the end of the line leaves her gate unlidded because she is proud and late. One person calls. She answers sharply. The person stays quiet. The morning after, she notices the neighbor no longer borrows salt. She realizes the issue was not the salt, it was the sharpness. She returns with a bowl of water and a folded cloth. She says she can keep the door closed until she learns the words. She says that next time she speaks in haste, she will return to the word's gate first. The neighbor accepts, and the lane becomes quieter. In the bedtime lens, this is how Eshu appears. No curse, no spectacle, just consequences that make the mouth slower and more useful. Another item we can attach here is the canes, keys, and gate signs seen in different traditions. A cane in one path is not the cane of dominance. It is a physical reminder of balance between worlds. Keys are not only lock breakers. They are permissions that cannot be skipped. If any symbol looks like fear in one image and hospitality in another, do not confuse the symbol with a fixed moral. Consider what the ritual asks. Is it asking for care or for display? This is also where we include language discipline. In some households, the figure is called by one name, in another by another. Some lineages prefer Elegua, some prefer ESU, some call Legba in another sphere, and the sound changes while the threshold principle remains. So keep this pronunciation note gently. If you are speaking to Cuban forms, the cadence is different. If you are speaking to Yoruba forms, it changes again, but the breath remains the same shape, the same breath of caution before speaking. Another way to hold this is through 3 quiet practices for the last stretch. First, name the road before walking. Second, name the intention before asking. Third, return what you borrow before your voice becomes restless. If you keep these Eshu functions as teacher, if you do not, he becomes mirror. Mirrors are often more revealing than teachers at night, and reflection can be uncomfortable in a good way. And now, one more slow recap to reset orientation. We have moved through Odu origins, clay hunger mythology, the Agberu turn to Laterite, We have moved through market ethics, speech integrity, Onile Orita, and the messenger role. We have looked at diaspora shapes in Cuban Elegua, Brazilian Exu, and Haitian Legba, and noted genealogies carefully. We have returned to objects, staff, Cowries, Laterite, water, thread, bowls, and keys. If your breath is steady and your shoulders have loosened, you can allow sleep. If your mind is still attentive, we can keep a few final loops. For those still awake, one gentle sequence remains. Picture 3 thresholds in your mind: the road junction, the house threshold, the doorway between thought and action. Each one is a place for permission. Each one asks the same thing: permission to enter or permission to stop. Permission to ask or permission to wait. Permission to say yes and permission to say no. And when you remember this in the middle of a crowded day, let your response shrink by one step. Say the sentence once, then pause. Ask whether the road you are using is honest. If yes, go. If no, stand still and breathe. This is the same principle as the traveler at the junction who learns to greet the stone. Slow is not weakness. Slow is the way truth is made audible. Now we return one final time to the constant image, but with all the new layers. The Laterite stone, the Cowries, the small staff, the bowl of water, the fork of roads, the red-black seam, the dim lamp, and all of these are quiet companions to attention. You can hold the image and not fear it. You can hold it as a pattern for better choices. And if you keep your part of the pattern honest, the story continues without force. The script can now drift toward rest. Let the junction empty in your mind. Only one tiny pool of light remains. And in that light, there is room for all names, because all names belong to action, not only to argument. If you have heard about 201 or 256, you can rest now on the number. The number is less important than the discipline. And if the mind still asks for one more line, here it is. One message is only as strong as the care behind it. One road is only as safe as the trust it carries, and one home is only as open as the speech that holds it. And the night keeps no score. Only the road does, slowly with dust and breath. Sleep can enter here. You can sleep now. And if sleep is still a little delayed, we can take one more long language cycle, the one about how words become roads over time. The first point is that many scholars and elders alike describe this figure as a guardian of language, not language as polish, language as movement, language as a bridge with uneven boards. And that idea appears again in Diaspora thought, where he becomes a signifier of rhetorical play. The same spirit of saying one thing and listening for what sits between the lines appears in many communities as the art of signaling respectfully. It is never the same as deception for harm. It is often the same as correction through style. You can think of it like this. Two people share a proverb. One person says, "You are late." The other person hears, "You are careless." If the hearing is too rigid, the proverb becomes accusation. If the hearing is wider, the proverb becomes invitation. This small lesson is not only modern literature, it is an old village tactic for avoiding the violence of literal takes. And this is why stories about crossroads can feel patient. They are always giving the mind room between syllable and meaning. Because if the listener takes everything too quickly, the same crossing becomes conflict. If the listener stays with the crossing, the same crossing becomes teaching. There is a gentle scene for this. Imagine a market elder who likes to speak through a proverb. The younger person hears the proverb and takes offense. The elder waits. The younger person raises a second voice. The elder says only one sentence, "I am not naming you," then tells the same proverb in a calmer tone. The younger person hears again, and the anger becomes less fixed. In many lineages, this is considered a messenger effect. The elder does not need to win the argument. The room only needs to regain proportion. Now we can return to a concrete object with a new layer, the Òrìṣà's cane. In some Haitian frames, the gatekeeper image leans on a crooked cane. That cane is read as a body extension of a two-world stance, one end of attention in the visible world, one end in the unseen one. The limp often described in that iconography can be read with calm. It is not weakness alone. It is a visual reminder that service carries balance and asymmetry. You cannot stand perfectly centered all the time. And if you include this image in visual language, you can avoid making it theatrical. The cane can be just a staff in low light, not a threat, not a spectacle. This leads naturally to keys. In some traditions, keys and locks appear when gatekeepers are named. Keys mean consent, not possession. They indicate that access is a negotiated condition, not a private privilege. And here we can add a safe comparison between the keys and the Cowries. Both are small objects with large social value. Coins and shells can move people through a room. Keys and words can move people across consequence. The same lesson appears in syncretic naming traditions. In some Cuban houses, names from Catholic saints are linked with the gatekeeper role. That linking can be a strategy for survival under pressure. For ritual continuity, it is sometimes a practical disguise. For the theology, it is often read as a language bridge, not a replacement. And we can do this without confusion if we keep function first. Look at what opens. Look at what is asked before you pass. The rest is context. There are several names for the same function, and this matters in migration. Elegua in Cuban settings. Eju may be in different phonetic traditions. Exu in Brazilian contexts. Legba, where Lafunes and Vodun history blend. The names are close as neighbors, but not always identical cousins. We can keep this careful distinction in one sentence at bedtime. Shared doorway roles do not erase distinct genealogies. Shared doorway roles create responsible comparison. Now, to ground this comparison further, let us return briefly to the 201 or 256 path logic in a calm counting rhythm. If you count each path as a doorway, then no path is useless. The danger is choosing one and denying the others. The wisdom is acknowledging plurality without losing orientation. In this logic, one can tell the difference between chaos and plurality. Chaos makes relation impossible. Plurality allows relation. So when stories say Eshu became many, they are often teaching plurality management, and management in practice means protocol. Let us now add one more historical story thread from research lines about social memory and reclamation. Imagine a person reading an old dictionary and meeting a label that flattens a deity into the figure of evil. The person feels a familiar fear because the word is old and powerful in the language they learned at school. Then the same person hears an elder describe sacrifice, accountability, and measured speech, and one memory finally softens the label. This is not immediate reversal. It is patient correction. Correction in community language. And for a bedtime listener, the correction is this. Names carry lineage burdens. Some names need to be returned carefully. You can practice this at home. If a phrase arrives too quickly and sounds final, pause. Add context. If your own mind has inherited one harsh label, test it against lived behavior. Now we can open the ritual layer more concretely. There are houses where the first request is a simple libation: palm oil, palm wine, water, maize. Not because these are expensive, because they mark continuity. In some communities, rum or black coffee and tobacco appear as additional pathways to intent. Again, not a list for spectacle. They are clues to social economy and sensory memory. Coffee and palm wine are not only flavors, they indicate rhythm of work, rest, and exchange. Now we can tell a calm ritual vignette around a small house ceremony. An elder enters, no loud announcement. The lamp is low, the floor is swept. The first object placed is water. The second is a clean cup. The third is whatever small grain was offered by the family. Then the elder speaks of intention, not of fear, not of punishment, of attention. The ritual is not about buying permission. It is about honoring the terms before asking for change. This scene has many versions. Some include drumming, some remain silent. Both can be complete if attention is present. And to return to item lore, a staff or figurine may sit beside the table. If the family includes a carved staff, it is not required to be touched. It is asked to witness. If a stool with cowries is used, it is not only a decorative bowl, it becomes a countable memory of promises. And if a cloth bundle is tied nearby, its knot is not to hide, its knot is a visible shape of measure. Untying with care can be a ritual lesson. Because this project is grounded in stories, let us add 2 short household stories with different textures. Story 1. A carpenter and a borrowed tool. The carpenter borrows a fine blade for 2 days, for 3 days, for 4 days, and the family waiting for the tool starts delaying their own work. The carpenter says every day the same phrase: "I will return it tomorrow." Tomorrow arrives, the blade is still there, and one child quietly notices the delay, not with anger, with concern. The child tells the carpenter, "Can we keep a note by the blade so everyone remembers?" The carpenter laughs, then pauses, then writes the note. That note is a tiny threshold marker, not a punishment. The carpenter can recover relationship with one action. The note becomes a roadmap of trust. Story 2. 2 neighbors share firewood. One neighbor gives a small bundle in the evening. The other neighbor returns a smaller one in the morning. No one complains. Then the first notices the imbalance at market and chooses a public scene. The story then turns toward pride. The mediator asks both to sit by the threshold and to say a one-line accounting of what was promised and what was taken. And both agree to align. The first gets the rest of the firewood, the second gets time to repair trust. No miracle, no sermon, only the mechanics of relationship. These scenes are the best medicine for late-night thoughts. They are small, repeatable, and not dramatic. Now the final item lore extension. The black-red cloth seam as emotional compass. If red is high heat, black is receptive shadow. The seam where they meet is where choice is made. This seam can be seen in cloth, in roads, in arguments. When seam language is too rough, people mistake it for aggression. When seam language is gentle, the same seam means continuity. In a long night, you can notice seam language by the end of your day. Where did I push too hard? Where did I close too soon? Where did I leave a sentence unfinished? Each unfinished sentence is a small seam. Some seams can wait, some seams need acknowledgement. Now we return to the Diaspora again because this is where this file can hold the user's request well. If you are in Cuba and working with Elegua at a doorway, if you are in Brazil and opening with Exu before a ceremony, if you are in Haitian contexts where Legba is first called, the recurring practical pattern is open then pass. You first name the threshold, then you request right conduct, then you continue. This sequence prevents spiritual overreach. It says, do not force the work. Offer structure first, desire later. And now we can weave a little map of how these names travel in memory. In one household, the same person may know 4 names for the opening figure depending on ritual school. At work, one form. At home, another. In public, a safer name. In prayer, an older name. And none of this is contradiction. It is adaptation, and adaptation is not erasure, it is survival with memory. In modern media, stories often compress this complexity into villain images. That compression is easier than listening. You can notice this as cultural fatigue, and then return to community scale details. If a figure is shown as all darkness, the actual ritual grammar will still ask for measured offering, precise speech, and social repair. So for a bedtime ear, the response is soft. Let us keep local stories where they are. Let us keep local rituals where they breathe. Another short myth sequence from cross-Atlantic movement. There is a traveler crossing from one ritual world to another. He carries a word he thinks is the same. In one city, the word opens a door. In another, it sounds like an accusation. He learns that names move with accents, and the lesson is not to give up meaning. It is to listen for the local rule. So again, the crossroads is a teacher of contextual listening. And this is maybe the strongest modern lesson of all. Not only theology, but diplomacy of the tongue. Now one more recap, because this stretch has woven many threads. We have added the language layer, signifying practices, Odu origin motifs, diaspora iconography, ritual protocols, and household micro-stories. We have returned to cane, keys, cowries, keys, and cloth seams, and the ethics of promises. If these are now held together, you are already on the long road toward completion. For rest, we can go even more microscopic and keep the breathing loop. Inhale, notice your jaw. Exhale, notice your next thought. Let the thought stand at a junction. Do not push it over the edge. If a second thought comes, let it stand. If a third thought comes, set them like stones by the path. You can return later. In this way, the crossroads does not have to stay loud. The crossroads can become a resting shelf where each thought waits until daytime. And if you are still awake, this is a final gentle anchor. There is the same fork you can always return to. Honor thresholds, match intention and action, speak carefully, make repair quickly, and then, when needed, rest. Now, one final image with the old road, an empty 4-way junction under moonlight, a small stone, a little bowl of water, one string, 2 cowries, and a dark, patient lantern. And the night does not accuse, it only receives what comes softly. And it can receive this final phrase. The stories do not end when conflict ends. They deepen when conflict becomes language and language becomes care. If the listener has arrived here and is still awake, You can close with this. Every name of the gatekeeper is a reminder that no road is truly private. Every road is held by a network of obligations. Every obligation is a doorway you can choose to cross with more attention. And now sleep can arrive. You can rest now. And now, because this piece still has room, we can add one further deep soak thread before the end. This thread is about precision in numbers and timing. In some ritual descriptions, Odotura is the 17th pattern after the first 16. That is a technical detail. It means not one thing plus many things. It means one layer after another. And this matters because the whole Crossroads logic is often a layered grammar. The listener does not need to master the classification. The listener does need to feel the sequence of attention. When sequence is respected, the same word can carry multiple levels. When sequence is rushed, the word becomes only surface, and surface-only words often produce conflict. So we can think of the 17th as a soft reminder. The road you take now is not random. It appears after preparation. And preparation is moral, not only technical. In one account, this same preparation includes invocation on the initiate's head. The head is where response becomes possible, not in the same way as command, in a gentler way as alignment. This prepares the bridge between what one receives from Aifa and how one acts in the village. If there is no bridge, knowledge becomes noise. If there is no bridge, stories lose their function. To keep this at bedtime, we do not need to keep speaking in abstract. Let us do one final object and action story. There is a woman who begins a business at dawn. She borrows tools. She borrows patience. She borrows patience from herself. First week, she returns all borrowed items. Second week, she says she will return by evening. Third week, she says she forgot. The same promise repeats without violence, just a softer hardening. The market people begin to avoid her stall, not because she is cruel, because consistency cannot be improvised indefinitely. When she realizes this, she places a small bowl at her doorway, not as a ritual show, as a reminder before every transaction. She tells each person, this bowl is for the promise. That detail seems small. It becomes large, because each transaction now has a breath between desire and action, and by that breath, trust starts to repair. If you place this in your own day, small delay becomes prevention, small consistency becomes rest. Now we can braid this with one more Diaspora comparison. In some Lukumi lines, Elegua is counted with the other warrior figures near initiation circles. The number and grouping give context. He is one among protectors and messengers. But because he opens roads, the first opening often belongs to him. In Brazilian houses, Exu categories include one line close to Yoruba inheritance and other lines shaped by local histories. This is not confusion for confusion's sake. It is adaptation in a plural city. Some lineages preserve strict forms. Some lineages recast forms with new symbolic pressure. And in all cases, the practical test remains. Does the figure serve relationship repair, or does the figure become a cover for harm? If it covers harm, the practice is unaligned. We have seen this theme in the same way in modern public culture. Fearful labels can flatten nuance into a single moral color. Flattening can happen quickly. Unflattening takes quiet and repetition. Now we can use one final comparative microstory from a cross-Atlantic memory. There are 3 musicians in a coastal city. One plays Lukumi drumming, one keeps a Brazilian rhythm, one carries a Haitian chant. All three speak of gates, each uses a different term. One night they perform together. The first musician asks his partner for timing. The second asks his partner for tone. The third asks his partner for silence. When they keep all three asks in place, the room settles. The music becomes readable to all three. That is a practical diaspora lesson. Timing, tone, and silence are shared gatekeeping. Across cultures, through different names, the same disciplines remain. In research language, this is called convergent function. In practice language, this is called kindness with memory. Now another item rule extension from research notes. On some accounts, the cane is not only the sign of limping access, it is also the symbol of leaning and stabilizing. As people walk through difficult social terrain, the lean point helps prevent fall. So if your day involved a difficult phrase, the internal cane is the reminder to pause. Lean into breath, pause, then speak again. In the same section, keys carry the same principle. Not all access is earned instantly. Keys are kept by those who have carried terms. And in some homes, the lock itself is not heavy steel. It is a social lock, opened through accountability. That is why the phrase, first ask, then enter, appears in many ritual schools. It is both etiquette and theology. Without this order, ritual becomes mere spectacle. With it, ritual becomes passage. One additional story strand, the oracle messenger. A person receives an instruction to speak gently to a neighbor. The person nods and says yes. The person returns home and forgets the instruction, not because of rebellion, because of the pace of daily labor. At the next gathering, the forgotten instruction appears as friction. The neighbor speaks less. The person feels the friction and says, why is this happening? The answer is not blame alone. The answer is unfinished action. This is where stories say the crossroads figure is present, not pulling strings, not choosing sides for pleasure, holding the moment against forgetting. If you hear this in your own day, you can create a small rule tonight. Write one instruction from anyone who teaches you and perform it before sleep if safe and possible. This is how abstract teachings become muscle memory. Because if teachings remain only conceptual, they become abstract anxiety. If teachings become action, they become quiet safety. Now, we can return to modern language distortions. There are historical moments where translation systems and dictionaries collapsed many fields into one, and translation systems can still do this. If not corrected, they train new ears to hear monsters where teachers stood. So one can respond with patient correction. Recheck the original context. Notice what ritual ethics it actually describes. Notice which stories show responsibility. This is exactly why our script uses stories first. Stories carry nuance slowly and resist flattening. Stories can carry an object into the moral field. Stories can carry correction across generations. If the mind in the dark still wants data, we can hold 3 small numbers to remember this frame. 1 for every promise made, 1 for every promise kept, 1 for every promise repaired. If one number is missing, return to the road and repair. Now we can take a longer sensory cycle around the crossroads object field. The Laterite darkens when wet. It becomes dusty when dry. It remains regardless. The Cowrie warms less than skin. It is smoother than river clay. Water in a clay bowl appears still and then moves. The string on a scale may stretch and then settle. If you hold these 5 objects together in one memory, You have an ethics kit, not for ritual performance, for daily alignment. This image returns to the old cap motif. If one says red, if one says black, if one says white, the story says reality has multiple surfaces. The remedy is not to deny all colors. The remedy is to let all be read before response. You can hold this with one practical breath sequence. Look at the surface. Pause. Look at the underside. Pause. Choose slowly. Now, a comparative note on personhood. The Onile Orita image asks each person to become a good builder of their own boundaries, not just a follower. In the community, boundaries are social architecture. If a boundary collapses at home, markets feel that collapse. If boundaries are repaired, roads remain open. In one practical teaching, a household with repeated anger and no repair loses its threshold calm. In another, a household with small repair each day gains a soft gate. The difference is not wealth, it is repetition. We can translate this as build one gentle boundary tonight. It can be a promise not to interrupt. It can be a return of one borrowed tool. It can be a direct apology. One boundary is enough for a night. Because each action is small, no one has to carry the whole system at once. And this is one reason Eshu stories feel humane. They teach with manageable steps. Now we revisit the role of messengers. Every messenger carries instruction and tone. If the tone is rough, the message lands with friction. If the tone is respectful, the same message can become action. In a late night story pattern, a messenger asks one more neighbor for permission to pass. The second neighbor gives a quiet blessing and expects the message unchanged. The messenger returns and is praised because the message was clean, not because he is loud, because he respected the crossing. This is an understated story, exactly as our tone requires, and it can be used in modern routines by keeping instruction channels clean. If you want to hear this as a modern practice, you can treat every text message as a roadside message. Send clearly, send one intention. If uncertain, send one follow-up clarification. Do not multiply confusion intentionally. This is not trivial. The road now also runs through devices, so old ethics can travel new roads. And this is where the Papa Legba parallel can also be made practical. Before any new channel is opened, you can ask, is this for care or for force? If for care, continue. If for force, pause. Similar to saying, greet the gateway. Set the intention. Move gently. Another micro story from a crossroads with elders. 3 elders sit by a late road. 2 young people arrive with one grievance. The first says, he owes me. The second says, she owed me. The elder says, bring 3 objects. 1 object for fact, 1 object for feeling, 1 object for repair. The first object may be a bowl. The second object may be a shell. The third may be water. They place all 3 and speak in sequence. The grievance becomes smaller. The night returns to quiet. In this short scene, no thunder, no dramatic curse, only sequence. And sequence is how many communities repair long before legal systems intervene. If you keep this sequence in your body, the crossroads figure is less threat and more method. Now a final comparison with mythic multiplicity. If there are many manifestations and no 2 communities say the same list, the practical reading is this. Test each claim by whether it supports ethical action. That is the only stable test for a long night. The figure as divine policeman can sound severe. It is not police for punishment. It is a call for self-corrective hearing. For the last part of the expansion, we can let one more object loop return. Laterite stone with dust, thread with knot, string and cowries, water and bowl, lantern and gate. And if each object is used with care, each one says, you do not need to fix everything now, you need to begin where you are. If you feel the story still moving in your chest, you can do a final short breath recitation. The gate is not the enemy. The gate is a reminder. The reminder is for the living. One final micro recap for this addition. We returned to initiation, numerics and layers. We returned to the clay child's story as a lesson in transformation. We held diaspora forms with distinction. We returned to practical household repair and communication etiquette, and we reminded that technology and language can also carry crossings. All of this is one road. Now we return to rest softly. If your mind is still awake, let one last image hold. An empty road at dawn, not yet day, just a cool seam between dark and light, and a small bowl at the edge. You do not need to complete every road tonight. Just stand where the road meets its next question. Sleep can meet you here. You can sleep now. And for one final deep cycle, we can enter the initiation grammar that many oral lineages keep close. This adds another lens to the same crossroads logic. In Ifa language, there is an initiation sequence where Odu Otura is invoked with precision. And in that setting, initiation is not only a title, it is a map of responsiveness. Some accounts describe the moment as the point where all earlier patterns are made active. The phrase activating other magi appears. In simpler speech, this can be heard as a way of saying the first doorway makes many other pathways legible. That is why the same deity can be called both singular and multiple without contradiction. The singular is not reduction. The multiple is not chaos. The multiple is function across context. This distinction may help the modern listener who is used to strict labels. Eshu is not required to obey one dictionary form. Eshu is required to keep pathways intelligible. We can hold this in one sentence. The one is the rule. The many are its applications. In another narrative, the figure from clay appears as an early social experiment. The maker is told to shape. The shaped one speaks and moves. That speed triggers concern in the sky, and hunger appears as unbounded force. Instead of ending with punishment, the teaching line carries transformation. The story says a cutting boundary is made, then reassembled into spread presence. If you hear only the cutting, the story remains brutal. If you hear the reconstruction, it becomes social laws. Because reconstruction is what allows movement in ritual work. Without it, power remains unmanaged. With it, power can travel safely between earth and heaven. This is one reason Laterite appears as representative matter. It marks place without theatrical monument. It is stable and ordinary, and if you think of the stone as a sign of one episode alone, it becomes a symbol. If you think of it as a repeating medium, it becomes instruction. Now we can return to number logic with the Merendin-Logan sequence. Not all listeners will know the technical steps. What matters here is this. The cast of shells shows possibility before certainty. The shell reading asks the reader to listen for pattern, not certainty. This is why Cowries in this domain are always moral. Counting itself becomes etiquette. The one who counts quickly and egoistically can misread consequence. The one who counts with patience can live with ambiguity. This is also why the staff and the cowrie are often near each other in old shrine descriptions. One is support, one is count. Both are conditions. If a ceremony has only one of the two present, some lineages may still call it complete. That depends on local custom. But in the broad comparative frame, both point to mediated exchange. Because not every house has the same materials, and the difference is not failure, it is adaptation. Here is another grounded story for that concept. There are two students in one town. One inherits a carved staff from an elder, the other is not given any object. Both want to serve. The first student holds the staff carefully. The second asks to borrow esto. The elder gives each according to weight, the staff with one, the Laterite with the other, and each student learns the same lesson. Tools are reminders, not guarantees. One student begins to rely on appearance. The staff is polished too much. The other begins to confuse object with transformation, and in time both students return to the elder asking for repair. The elder does not rebuke their devotion. He asks one question: are your words aligned? This can sound gentle, and it is, because where there is this mismatch, the bridge fails, and where there is alignment, bridges hold even with different objects. We can now take one more long micro recap. We have now traced Oduotura, clay formation, Merindin Logan logic, staff and cowrie partnership, and adaptation through local customs. These are all ways the same crossroads principle becomes specific and practical. In modern migrations, this principle of practical adaptation became even more visible. The same threshold logic moved with people across oceans and into new ritual worlds. Language shifted, names shifted, drum names and songs shifted, but certain requirements stayed: measure, repair, recognition. In some Cuban liturgical forms, the gatekeeper appears behind the door and linked to specific saintly images. This was not simply theology, it was also a protective grammar under surveillance. In this grammar, the figure can be tiny and domestic. The same function can be daily rather than rare. In the same Atlantic map, Exu in some Brazilian houses remains a ritual messenger tied to opening work. In other contexts, different categories and names were created. Some of those contexts turned the figure into a harder social sign. Some of those contexts sought to invert colonial fear into counter-identity. So the bedtime rule remains: distinguish genealogy, function, and local framing before assigning a fixed moral. If each level is identified, the listener can stay steady. In other words, you can acknowledge the historical overlaps with Haiti. You can also acknowledge that the core Vodun lineages there are distinct in older genealogical accounts. For shared practice, that distinction is not always a division. It is a map of respect. In some Vodou scenes, there is the image of the old man with cane and pipe. Pipe not as vice, as rhythm of pause, limp not as weakness, as one world and other world stance. If you hold that image and keep it calm, it aligns with the same caution we keep for all gate symbols. Access has etiquette, authority has limits, desire must pass through form. And because the user asked for Papa Legba links, we can make one final clear thread. Share roads with Legba where there is convergence. Preserve distinction where genealogy differs. That is not contradiction. That is scholarship and devotion speaking the same ethic of precision. Now we can return to the market floor as final living ground. There is one street where messages move and one where goods move. Each day people repeat names, prices, and promises. Each day someone delays and someone waits, and this is where small breaches appear. The ethical map says, if a promise is delayed, repair quickly. If repair is delayed, the road accumulates friction. If friction stays, trust thins. If trust thins, the whole market becomes harder. So when elders insist on greeting each other and settling accounts before the day closes, they are not merely old-fashioned, they are safeguarding road conditions. A concrete story for this is simple. Two hawkers at dusk. One hawker gives exact weight and asks no favor. The other sells less than measured, then apologizes at night with a folded cloth and a little food. The elder buyer receives both and notices the difference, not because of arithmetic alone. Because one hawker preserved speech and action, the other is practicing repair. This is how roads keep healing in stories, not by miracles, by corrections, small corrections repeated many times. Now one final object cluster from research notes, the phallic coded power and its safe interpretation. In some iconographies, strength is depicted with exaggerated form. It can look uncomfortable if read only from outside. Within ritual context, it is often tied to generative force and transformative potential. The key correction is that power is not the same as permission to dominate. Power is potential with boundaries. So a phallic motif near a threshold can be read as force that must be bounded, not as force to excuse harm. Because this is the same tone we need when speaking about sacrifice and animal offerings. Some traditions include specific animals, some communities do not. For our tone, the specific species is not the moral center. Intent is. For the moral center, make the intention explicit, make the action consistent, make the community witness. Otherwise, the offering remains ungrounded. This is similar to digital distortion stories too. If the same figure is translated repeatedly into one fearful word, memory can harden. If the same figure is reintroduced through lived practice, language softens, not by denial but by restoration. And this brings us to one of the quieter modern lessons. When a community names historical harm, it does not erase the deity. It often restores the living ethics around the figure. In this case, restoration means shifting from accusation language to responsibility language. Now we can do one last long image sequence to hold all this while inviting sleep. Picture a crossroads at 3 times of night. First, after rain, the Laterite dark. Second, after market, the dust quiet. Third, before dawn, the wind cool and patient. In each time slice, the stone remains, the small ball remains, the sound remains minimal. The figure remains not as interruption, as governance of passage, as reminder that every choice still reaches someone. This sequence can become a bedtime practice. At night, before sleep, select one object at your mind's edge. Stone, string, water, cowrie, seam, or key. Ask whether your day has honored its counterpart, then release the question. And if another thought returns, return to the fork. Look for the smallest ethical shift you can do. That is usually enough. Now here is the final recap for this final cycle. We carried Oduotura and initiation language. We carried the clay story and Agberu repair logic. We carried Merindin Logan as counting method. We carried diaspora distinctions, Elegua, Exu, Papa Legba. We carried ritual objects and the language of intention. We carried market and household correction stories. All of this circles back to one line. Crossroads practice is a disciplined art, not panic. And now, if sleep is ready, let it be ready. If not, this is a final line. The road does not demand urgency. It asks only for care. So slow your jaw and breathe once. You can rest now. Now let us make the crossroads into a lullaby by returning to it again and again, each time with a slightly different detail, the way the same song can be sung in many voices without becoming a different song. The junction is quiet, the dust is smooth, the Laterite stone sits where it has always sat, patient enough to outlast arguments. The lantern is low, and its light is not trying to conquer darkness, only to make a small circle of safety. In one version of the night, the wind is dry and carries the smell of earth. In another version, the air has a hint of water in it, as if rain passed earlier and left its memory behind. In another, the air is almost still and the insects supply the movement, a steady sound that does not demand meaning. And as we sit with this junction, we can tell smaller stories that do not need a king or a palace. Stories that are as ordinary as a doorway. Stories that are as ordinary as a borrowed pot. Stories that are as ordinary as a sentence that lands the wrong way. There is a man who borrows a mortar from his neighbor. He borrows it for pounding yam. The mortar belongs here because food is one of the quiet ways communities stay alive, and tools for food are tools for survival. He promises to return it the next day. The next day he is busy. He keeps the mortar. The day after that he is still busy. He keeps it again. And as days pass, the promise becomes thin. The neighbor does not shout. The neighbor only begins to avoid the borrower. The neighbor only begins to feel a small coldness where warmth used to be. And this is how communities fray, not with dramatic betrayal, with small carelessness repeated. In the law, logic, this is a crossroads lesson. The man has a choice each day. Return the mortar and keep trust strong, or keep the mortar and weaken trust. And because the crossroads is where choices live, the story places Eshu in the background like a quiet witness, not as a demon, but as the principle that says choices add up. And now, since we have mentioned yam again, we can widen yam into a longer meaning without turning it into an inventory. Yams are heavy because they store time. They store seasons of rain and sun. They store the patience of weeding. They store the waiting that happens underground where no one claps for you. And that is why yam appears in stories about trust. When you share yam, you share stored work. When you steal yam, you steal stored work. When you return a mortar used for yam, you return the tool that turns stored work into food. And in that slow widening, we can notice how a single object becomes a door into ethics. This is the item law rule in action. Objects are not just scenery, they are teachings. Now, let us return to the cap again, but not to retell the whole story. Instead, we look at the cap as a reminder of how quickly the mind becomes certain. At night, certainty can be heavy. It can press on the chest like a stone. It can keep a person awake as they try to prove again and again that their angle was right. And so tonight we borrow the cap lesson as a calming technique. If you are stuck on a thought, you do not have to solve it. You can turn it. You can look at it from the other side. You can say perhaps there is another color here that I have not seen, and then you can set it down. because setting it down is also a crossroads. There is the road of thinking, and there is the road of resting, and sometimes the wisest choice is to step onto the resting road without asking permission from your worries. Now we widen the idea of the crossroads into the body. In the body there are thresholds too, the moment before the breath enters, the moment before the breath leaves, the pause between, and those pauses are small crossroads where the nervous system can choose, tense or soften. So we take a slow breath in and out, and we notice the small gate at the top of the inhale and the small gate at the bottom of the exhale, and we greet those gates the way we greet doorways. And now we can do another counting sequence, because counting is a calm road. Imagine cowries again, not as money but as counted breaths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we do not rush. We let each number be a small lantern. And in the background of this counting, you can remember the market. The market is a place where counting happens out loud. But at night, you can count inside your own chest quietly, and the counting will still work. Now we return again to the idea that the crossroads is a managed place. In many accounts, what makes life workable is not the absence of uncertainty. It is the presence of protocols, greetings, repairs, measurements done honestly, debts acknowledged, apologies spoken. These are small things, but they keep the road open. And this is why demonization is such a deep misunderstanding, because it turns a teacher of protocols into a monster. And when a teacher becomes a monster, people stop learning, they only fear. So our tone tonight is reclamation through calmness. We do not need anger, we only need accuracy and a slow voice that lets accuracy land gently. Now, to add more lore braid, we can place Eshu at another boundary. The boundary between public and private speech. There are words you say in public that you do not say in private. There are words you say in private that you do not say in public. And when those two registers mix, confusion happens. Imagine someone who jokes too sharply in public and then says, "It was only a joke." The sentence lands like a stone. Another person carries it home in their chest, and at night they replay it. Did they mean it? Did they not mean it? This is another place where the crossroads teacher sits. He sits between what is said and what is meant. He sits between public laughter and private pain. And his lesson is not to make you paranoid. His lesson is to make you careful with your mouth, the way you are careful with a knife. And because we are telling this as a bedtime archive, we do not linger on pain. We linger on repair. In some tellings, the person who spoke sharply returns later with a calmer voice. They say, "I did not carry my words carefully." And that sentence becomes a gate. It opens a new road, and the community breathes again. And now, because we have returned to repair again, we can let the night loop. The crossroads again, the literate stone again, the lantern again, the calm road again. And if sleep is arriving, you can step onto it here. If you are still awake, we continue. And so we continue. Now we come to another strand that often appears in research and in oral tellings, the strand of multiplicity. Many people speak of Eshu as one presence, and many people also speak of Eshu as many presences. In some lineages, you may hear numbers spoken to 201. In other places you may hear other numbers. And in the bedtime way we are telling this story, we do not need to hold the number like a test. We only need to hold the feeling that the crossroads is everywhere. To make this feeling vivid, some tellings offer a creation-like story. They describe a time when the world could not yet hold so much motion in one place, so motion multiplied. In one version, Eshu is described as hungry for experience. Hunger here does not need to be frightening. We can treat hunger as appetite, as the desire of a young force to taste everything at once. And the story says that the appetite becomes too large for one body, so the body becomes many. We do not need sharp images. We can imagine it like this. One flame becomes many small flames, so the night can be lit in many places. One seed becomes many seeds, so the farm can be planted in many rows. One idea becomes many stories, so the same lesson can reach many ears. And so the myth of multiplicity becomes a practical explanation. How can a threshold keeper be at every doorway? How can a crossroads keeper be at every junction? How can a mediator stand between every intention and every outcome? The answer is he is described as many because life is many. And this is a gentle bedtime idea. Because if you feel scattered tonight, you can remember that multiplicity is not always a failure. Sometimes it is the natural shape of being alive, and rest is the way the many parts of you return to one breath. Now, let us return to Ifa and to the idea of guidance, because the research notes emphasize that Eshu is close to divination, not as a side character, but as a structural presence. And the easiest way to carry that at bedtime is to treat divination as a kind of listening practice, not fortune-telling as spectacle, listening as discipline. Imagine someone sitting with an elder. The elder does not predict the future like a movie. The elder tells stories. The elder offers proverbs. The elder describes patterns they have seen across many seasons. And the younger person leaves with something that is both simple and difficult. Slow down, be careful, do not rush the road, repair what you break. And where does Eshu sit in this picture? He sits at the point where the advice becomes action, the point where a proverb becomes behavior, the point where a story becomes a choice. So now let us build a longer divination vignette, not for excitement, for the calm weight of detail. Picture a room that is quiet in the afternoon. The light is low because the window is small. The floor is clay and cool under the feet. There is a mat. There is a simple wooden surface that holds the tools of listening. We do not need to name every tool. We only need to feel the atmosphere. The atmosphere is patient. The atmosphere is careful. The atmosphere suggests that words matter here. The person who has come for guidance speaks slowly, because even speaking slowly is an offering. It says, I am not throwing my life at you in a rush. I am presenting it carefully. The elder listens, and the elder responds with a story. The story is about a person who tried to hurry a harvest. The person pulled yams early. The yams were small. The person blamed fate. But the story says you cannot cheat time. And then after the story, the elder gives a small instruction. Return the tool you borrowed. Pay the debt you have been pretending not to see. Apologize to the person you spoke sharply to. And now, because this is where many people struggle, we slow the scene down even more. The listener nods, the listener thanks the elder, the listener leaves. And outside, the world is busy. The market is calling, children are running, someone is cooking, someone is laughing, someone is arguing. And in that busyness, the instruction is easy to forget, or it is easy to postpone, and postponing is also a crossroads. So the story says that the road begins to teach, not with punishment, with repetition. The person has the same argument again. The person meets the same problem again. The person finds the same kind of delay on the road again. And in the law logic, this is Eshu doing his work, not as an enemy, as a teacher who does not let you graduate without learning. And the bedside lesson is simple. If you want your life to become less tangled, become the kind of person who carries instructions into action. Become the kind of person whose words and behaviors match. Now, because we are building a long episode, we can slow down and talk about the idea of sacrifice in a bedtime safe way. We do not need graphic detail, we only need the moral shape. In many cosmologies, sacrifice is not a bribe. It is a way of showing seriousness. It is a way of transferring attention into action. It is a way of saying, I am not only speaking, I am giving up something. Time, comfort, pride. And in this frame, Eshu is the one who checks seriousness, not because he enjoys blocking people, because a system without checks becomes a system of noise, and noise is the enemy of meaning. So now we can tell a quiet story about noise. There is a man who talks loudly about his morality. He talks about how honest he is. He talks about how generous he is. He talks about how he respects elders. And yet when he leaves the circle, he behaves differently. He cuts in line. He cheats with measurements. He forgets his debts. He speaks sweetly and acts sharply. In the lore logic, this kind of split creates disorder, because people cannot plan around a person whose mouth and hands do not match. So the story says that the man's public reputation begins to drift, not because of gossip alone, because consequences attach. And again, Eshu does not need to appear with horns. He appears as the quiet principle that makes a person's actions become known, not through supernatural surveillance, through the normal movement of information in a community. And now, because we have spoken of information, we can return to the research note about mistranslation. It is worth noting that translation is itself a crossroads. It is a place where one language meets another, and when languages meet, meanings can slip. In the colonial period, some translators reached for familiar categories. They saw a figure who tests. They saw a figure who exposes. They saw a figure who makes consequences arrive, and they said that must be the devil. But that category carried a different moral universe, and so the translation did not only translate, it remade. We can hold that gently too, because the story we are telling tonight is also about how meanings travel, and how travel changes things. Now, to keep it story first, we will not stay in the dictionary. We will return to the road. Picture again the junction. This time, imagine a traveler from a far town arriving. They speak a different dialect. Their accent is different. Their idioms are different. They ask for directions, and the local person answers, but one word is misunderstood, and the traveler takes the wrong road. No one intended harm. The harm came from a seam in language. And the bedtime lesson is kind. You do not need to be ashamed of misunderstanding. Misunderstanding is part of being human. What matters is how you repair it. This is why a mediator matters, because a mediator is a person or a principle that helps repair seams. And now, because we have reached the theme of seams again, we can return to cloth one more time and make cloth into a longer landscape. Imagine the process of weaving, thread after thread, crossing, locking, repeating. Weaving is slow. It does not reward impatience. It punishes rushing with knots. And so weaving becomes a quiet model for the crossroads. One thread crosses another, and the crossing is what creates strength. So if you want a bedtime image of Eshu that is not a person, you can imagine him as the crossing itself. The place where threads meet, the place where a pattern becomes possible. Now, because we have used cloth as a metaphor, we return to concrete objects again to obey the item law rule. Laterite stone. It belongs because it anchors choice in the earth. Cowrie shell. It belongs because it links value and speech and it recalls counting. String. It belongs because measurement is moral. Water. It belongs because cooling is a discipline that repairs heat. And now, because we have refreshed our anchors, we can drift once more to the Atlantic and deepen that drift slowly. Picture the ocean at night, not as a dramatic storm, as a steady dark surface, and the ocean becomes another kind of crossroads. It is a meeting place of histories. It is a place where names travel. It is a place where rituals become mixed and remade. So when you hear Elegua near a doorway in Cuba, you can feel the same gate logic. When you hear Exu at the beginning of ritual work in Brazil, you can feel the same opening logic. When you hear Papa Legba invoked first in Haitian ceremony, you can feel the same threshold logic. And you can also keep the careful note. Functions converge, genealogies differ, the ocean made neighbors. And now we return once more to our constant image, because returning is how the mind learns to sleep. Laterite stone, lantern low, road calm. And so we continue. It is worth noting that in Yoruba storytelling, a trickster is often a safe way to speak about power. Power can be too direct to criticize openly. Power can be too close to the ear. Power can be too proud to listen. So stories soften the truth by giving it a mask. The mask might be a tortoise. The mask might be a spider. And in some cosmologies, the mask might be Eshu, the keeper of thresholds, the one who walks between. And when a story uses Eshu as the mask, it is often saying something like this. The world is not only what you see, it is also what you fail to notice. It is what you assume. It is what you do not ask. It is what you do not verify. And because humans do not verify everything, the world needs a figure who makes verification matter. So now, let us tell a story that sits beside the cap story like a second stool in the courtyard. This one is also about perception. In some tellings, a king wants to know which of his advisors speaks with a straight tongue. He does not want flattery. He does not want fear. He wants counsel that matches reality. So he announces a small task. Not a war, not a public trial, only a market errand. He asks the advisors to go to the market and return with the same thing. He does not say what the thing is. He only says, return with something that shows you understand the people. Some advisors return with expensive items. Some return with rare cloth. Some return with objects that look impressive in the palace light. And one returns with something plain, a small bowl. Inside the bowl is water. The king asks, "What is this?" And the advisor answers, "This is what cools a house. This is what ends quarrels. This is what turns a hot day into a tolerable day. This is what everyone needs, whether they are rich or poor." In the bedtime way we tell stories here, we do not need to decide whether this story is ancient or newer. We only need the lore logic, that the most powerful tool is often a simple one, and that the Crossroads teacher is often attached to simple tools because simple tools belong to everyone. So the bowl of water joins our list, again not as decoration. As a lore door, water belongs in a story about thresholds because thresholds are where heat rises. Thresholds are where pride shows up. Thresholds are where arguments begin, and cooling is a discipline. Now, to keep our episode anchored to issue, we return to the idea of communication. Because one of the strongest themes in the research notes is that Eshu is a mediator of speech. He stands between intention and outcome, between word and meaning, between what you thought you said and what the other person heard. So let us do a long, slow speech series. Picture a courtyard again. It is evening. People have eaten. The children have moved closer because the best stories are told when the air cools. The elders have settled into their seats because old backs like steady support, and in the center someone begins to talk. The storyteller does not shout. The storyteller does not perform urgency. The storyteller speaks in the calm rhythm of a person who has told the tale before and knows where it ends. And the story begins with a greeting, because greetings are gates. In many communities, greetings are the first offering. They say, "I am not entering your space carelessly. I am not taking your attention as if it is free. I am asking for it." And this is why, in some tellings, Eshu must be greeted first, because he is the gate logic. He is the greeting logic. He is the part of the world that says, do not rush into the sacred as if it is a market stall you can grab from. Now, imagine the storyteller begins to say something that could cause shame if spoken directly. Perhaps it is about greed. Perhaps it is about leaders who forget the people. Perhaps it is about a neighbor who borrows and never returns. In direct speech, this could start a fight, but in story speech it becomes safe. The greedy one becomes a character, the character becomes a lesson, and the lesson can enter a person's heart without forcing the person to defend themselves. This is another way to understand why a mediator matters. Some truths need a messenger that can carry them without breaking the room. And now, because we are building length through lore rather than inventory, we can add an academic note softly. In some modern readings, Eshu becomes a symbol of how language works, how meaning can be doubled, how a sentence can carry one thing on the surface and another thing underneath. We do not need to turn this into a lecture. We only need to notice the bedtime usefulness of the idea. If your mind is stuck on a sentence tonight, you can allow that sentence to have more than one face. You can stop trying to force it into one meaning. You can let it rest at the crossroads. Now, to keep the story braid anchored to concrete things, we return again to the Cowrie. But this time we do not treat it as money, we treat it as a mouth. Hold one Cowrie in your imagination, small, cool, smooth edges, and that slit like a closed lip. In a story world where speech is powerful, a mouth symbol belongs. It reminds you that words can open and close, that words can be withheld, that words can be offered. So when cowries appear in issue-related material culture, they are not random decoration. They are reminders that value and speech are connected, that a promise is a kind of currency, that reputation is a kind of wealth. And now, to deepen the Crossroads image again, we do a road series. Imagine 3 roads leaving the junction. One road goes to the market, one road goes to farms, one road goes to a river. The market road is busy in daylight. It carries laughter and bargaining. It carries gossip and news. It carries the clink of coins and the rustle of woven baskets. And when the market closes, the road becomes quiet, but it still holds the memory of voices. The farm road is steady. It carries feet early in the morning. It carries tools. It carries the slow patience of planting and waiting. And because farming is a long discipline, the farm road teaches humility. The river road is cooler. It carries people who want water, people who want washing, people who want to sit near a sound that does not argue. And the river is a lesson in flow. It moves without needing permission. It returns without needing praise. Now, let these 3 roads become a calming thought, because many minds at night are stuck as if there is only one road, the road of one worry, the road of one regret, the road of one unfinished conversation. But the Crossroads reminds you that there is always more than one road. Even if you do not walk it tonight, it exists. And if you want, you can imagine choosing the river road. You do not have to move your body, you only move your attention. You arrive at water, you hear the sound, you feel the coolness on the air, and the heat of the day begins to loosen. Now, as we sit by this imaginary river, we can tell another story strand. One that connects Eshu to divination without turning it technical. In some tellings, a person receives guidance and ignores it. We have already said this, but we can slow it down and make it a landscape. The guidance says, do not travel today. The person travels anyway, and the road is full of small delays, not disaster, delays. The cartwheel loosens, the rope knot slips. The river crossing is slower than expected. And by the time the person reaches the destination, the meeting has ended. They feel cheated by fate, but the story says fate gave you a sign and you ignored it. And here, Eshu is not a monster waiting in the bushes. He is the principle that makes signs matter. He is the one who says, if you do not listen, you will repeat lessons in the form of delays. And again, this is bedtime safe. It is not about fear, it is about listening. Now we do another micro recap because these recaps help the listener stay oriented without staying awake. We have remained with the crossroads. We have added a traveler who repeats until he greets the gate. We have added a bowl of water as a tool of cooling. We have added the idea that greetings are offerings. We have added roads to the market, the farms, and the river. And now, because the night is long, we continue. In some tellings, there is a simple rule. If you want to speak to the deep powers of the world, you begin by opening the way. And opening the way is not a magical trick. It is a kind of etiquette. It is a way of saying, I am not barging into the invisible as if I own it. So imagine a person who has a request. Not a dramatic request, something ordinary. Health for a child, peace in a marriage, clarity in a decision. They consult Ifa, and the oracle speaks in calm instructions. Slow down, return what you owe, repair what you broke, make an offering. And here is where the law turns into ethics. Because the offering is not only an item, the offering is also behavior. In some accounts, Eshu is remembered as the one who checks this, not as a thief at the gate, as an auditor. And when an auditor is present, the story is asking you a quiet question. Did you say you would do it? And did you do it? Because there is a deep calm inside accountability. It removes confusion. It clears the road. And now we can add another small story, the kind that could be told in a courtyard after sunset. There is a man who makes promises the way some people breathe. Quickly, without noticing. He promises to repay a loan. He promises to return a tool. He promises to show up at a meeting. And when the day arrives, he forgets. Or he remembers, but chooses comfort. And each time he tells himself a story. It is small. It does not matter. But the community is a cloth. And when a person pulls threads out of the cloth weakens. In this kind of story, logic Eshu does not need to throw lightning. He only needs to let the consequences arrive. The man needs a favor one day. He asks for help. And the people who would have helped him remember his old promises. They do not hate him. They simply do not trust his words. And so, without anyone shouting, the man meets a crossroads. He must choose, become careful, or become lonely. This is one of the quiet ways Eshu is a teacher. Not through horror, through the ordinary economy of trust. And now we can widen the market scene again, because the market is the best classroom for trust. Picture a market table at night after closing. The baskets are empty. The yams are gone. The ground has been swept. On the table there is a small pile of cowries. And beside the cowries there is a string. The string is not decoration. It is a tool. Because string measures. Cloth sellers measure with string. Rope sellers measure with length. Farmers measure with bundles. And measurement is where honesty becomes visible. So when you see string in a market story, it is another doorway into ethics. Eshu is often placed near the places where measurement happens. Because people can lie with numbers as easily as they lie with words. And now, because we are building a long calm episode, we can do another small inventory. Not too many items. Only enough to create a steady rhythm. A laterite stone, a small bowl, a few cowries, a coil of string, a folded cloth with a muted red-black seam, Each item is a lore door. The stone says choices are grounded. The bowl says communication can be poured. The Cowries say value is counted and trust is tested. The string says measure yourself honestly. The cloth says life is stitched with seams. And now, with those items in the room, we can tell a different kind of story. In some tellings, a man is sent to deliver a message. Not a divine message, an ordinary message. He is told, go to the next compound and tell them I will come at moonrise. And the messenger walks. And on the road he meets distractions. Someone calls him. Someone offers him food. Someone starts a conversation that feels important. And the message changes shape. Not by evil, by carelessness. So by the time the messenger arrives, he says something slightly different. Maybe he says, I will come at dawn. Maybe he says, I will come tomorrow. And the receiving family waits. And they feel disrespected. And they talk about it. And you can see how a community can be damaged by something as small as a shifted sentence. This is a very quiet way of understanding Eshu. He is not only a character who plays tricks. He is the principle that says messages are fragile. And the bedtime lesson is gentle. Carry your words carefully. And when someone else carries a word to you, leave room for a seam. And now, because we have stayed with human-scaled stories, we can drift upward again to the sky. The sun and moon story can be told in a calmer way as well. We can picture it as a schedule, not a fight. Picture a village that measures its day by light. Farming in the morning. Markets in the afternoon. Stories at night. And imagine that the sky becomes unreliable. Not terrifying, just confusing. People wake when they should sleep. They rest when they should work. And then gradually the schedule returns. The sun is given its hours. The moon is given hers. This is another crossroads lesson. Order is not automatic. Order is maintained. And now we return again to our constant image. The Laterite stone at the junction. The lantern low. The road calm. And we continue. There is another way to understand the crossroads. Not as a place where you get trapped. As a place where you learn timing. Because many of the stories about Eshu are stories about when to act. When to speak. When to wait. And that makes sense because the crossroads is a pause built into geography. Let us do a slow walking sequence. Imagine you are walking the road at night, not far from a market that has already closed. The air is cooler now. The ground has released its heat. And the sound of insects has become a steady blanket. Your feet know the path. You do not have to think about every step. You only have to keep going. And as you walk, you pass small thresholds. the edge of a farm, the edge of a grove, the edge of a compound where someone has already put out the cooking fire. Each edge is a place where a story can begin. In Yoruba lore, Eshu is often described as the one who notices edges. Not only edges of roads, edges of behavior. The edge between truth and exaggeration. The edge between a promise and a lie. And so many stories about him are stories about what happens when someone lives on the edge. To braid more lore into the night, we can stay with the language of names for a moment. In some accounts, you will hear multiple praise names, not as a roll call you must memorize, as a way of showing that one presence can be described from many angles. One name describes him as a keeper of crossroads, Onile Orita. Another name describes him as a force of potency and opening, Eshu Elegba. And when you hear those names, you can treat them like signposts. They do not demand that you travel deep into theology tonight. They only suggest that Eshu is remembered as both gate and motion. Now, to keep the lore first method, we attach those names to a story. In one telling, a person makes an offering with a mouth full of sweetness. They speak respectfully. They kneel. They present what they present. But in their heart they are planning something sharp. They are planning to use the ritual as a shortcut. This is a dangerous kind of thinking in many Yoruba moral framings. Because the point of a ritual is not only to move power. The point is also to align a person with responsibility. So the story says that Eshu notices the split, not to punish for fun, to keep the system honest. And the offering does not land as expected. The shortcut does not become a road. And later, when the person reflects, they realize that the real instruction was not only bring an item. It was become careful. This is why scholars and practitioners often describe Eshu as a figure of conditions, not a figure of random chaos. And now, to keep the night slow, we can do a Laterite series. Laterite is a simple red-brown earth. It is what sticks to feet in the rainy season. It is what dries and becomes dust in the dry season. It is not a rare jewel, and that is part of its meaning. Because a crossroads teacher is not only for kings. It is for everyone who walks. Picture Laterite on a sandal, a thin film of red dust on leather, and the dust holds the memory of where you have been. Picture Laterite in the grooves of a wooden doorstep. It collects there because people pass, and passing is constant. Picture Laterite in the palm lines of a farmer who has been working all day. The dust is an archive. It is a record that does not need words. And if you want a bedtime thought, you can borrow this. Your day leaves dust. It leaves evidence in your body. Rest is the way you wash the dust away without needing to explain it. And now, since we have introduced washing, we can do a small water sequence. Water in these stories is often a cooling principle, not in a medical way, in a social way. Water is what you pour when you want to calm a space. Water is what you offer when you want to make peace. So picture a small bowl of water at a threshold, not to scare anyone, to cool the road. And now, because this episode must become long, we widen the archive with a calm historical note. Many people today have heard the name Eshu through translations that did not carry the old logic carefully. In some colonial dictionaries, the name was used to translate the Christian devil. And once that happened, the crossroads became haunted in the imagination of many readers. But in older Yoruba frames, the crossroads is not a haunted place. It is a managed place, a place with etiquette. So we can hold this gently. Some misunderstandings are not personal. They are historical. And when a misunderstanding is historical, the repair can be slow. This is also a crossroads lesson. History places people at junctions they did not choose. And then they must choose how to walk forward anyway. And now we can return to story again, because story is the gentlest form of scholarship. There is a tale sometimes told about the way words can be double-voiced. In the tale, a person speaks politely, but their meaning is sharp. Another person hears the politeness and relaxes, and the sharp meaning slips through. In some accounts, Eshu is linked to this domain, not because he loves deception, because he exposes it. And exposure is a form of protection. It prevents a community from living inside sweet lies. Now we can do another micro recap. We are still at the crossroads. We have walked through the cap story, the market story, the message story. We have watched Laterite become an archive. We have watched water cool the road. And now, because we are staying with thresholds, we can drift into the diaspora gently. Across the Atlantic, the gatekeeper appears with different names. And it is important to keep our language careful. Some overlaps are historical. Some overlaps are functional. Some overlaps are devotional in the way people practice. So we do not need to force sameness. We only need to notice the shared shape of the gate. In some Cuban lineages, the gatekeeper is called Elegua. And many people describe him as placed near the doorway of a home. The domestic threshold becomes a daily crossroads. In Brazil, the name Exu can carry many histories at once. Some houses emphasize the ancient Mediator. Some public images have been shaped by demonizing language. And in Haiti, Papa Legba is remembered as the one who opens the gate to the Lua. And scholars often say gently that Legba has deep roots. So we can treat the link as a meeting at the crossroads of history. And now, to keep this bedtime safe, we return to objects again. The key, the doorway, the cane, the small stone at the threshold. Each one is a simple image that says something opens here. And if you are still awake, you can let these images become repetitive. Because repetition is a path back into rest. So we will do a closing loop, but not the final closing yet. We return to the crossroad. Laterite stone, lantern low, road calm. And we keep going slowly. In one account, a traveler approaches a junction with a heavy load. Not a mystical load, a sack of grain, a bundle of firewood, the ordinary weight of living. The traveler is tired. He wants the shortest road. And at the junction he sees a small marker. A stone. Laterite. In some communities, that stone is treated as a reminder. Remember the threshold. Remember the gate. But the traveler is tired, and tiredness is a kind of tunnel. He walks past without acknowledging. And the story does not punish him with a monster. It punishes him with a simple confusion. He takes the left path, and after some distance he realizes he has returned to the same junction. He takes the right path, and after some distance he returns again. This is not a horror maze. It is a gentle exaggeration of something real. When you move through a threshold carelessly, you often find yourself repeating the same argument, the same mistake, the same tired decision. And so, in the story, the traveler pauses at the junction again. He breathes. He looks down at the laterite stone. And he speaks simply. He greets the road. He greets the threshold. And after this small acknowledgement, the paths behave normally again. The story is not asking you to fear the crossroads. It is asking you to slow down at transitions. And now we can braid this into another kind of transition. The transition between speaking and doing. Many people think of an offering as a physical thing. And that is true in some ways. But in the guide language of this project, the offering also includes the behavior that carries it. Because an offering offered with arrogance is like a message carried by a careless messenger. It can arrive damaged. So now let us build a calm micro-story around this. There is a woman who has a dispute with a neighbor. Not a dramatic dispute. The kind of dispute that grows out of years of small frictions. A boundary line, a shared water pot, a goat that wandered where it should not. She wants the dispute to end. She wants peace. She consults Ifa, and she is told, make a repair. She is told, speak plainly. She is told, bring a small gesture. And the gesture is simple. A bowl of water, and some food shared. The bowl of water belongs here because water is how many communities cool heat. And the food belongs here because sharing food is a way of stitching cloth back together. So the woman prepares. She walks to the neighbor's doorway. And here is the crossroads. She can walk in proudly. She can say, I am doing this because the oracle told me. Or she can walk in humbly. She can say, I want peace because we are neighbors. In calmer tellings, she chooses humility. And when she does, the gesture works. Not like magic, like etiquette. And if you want to place Eshu in the story, you place him at the threshold moment. The moment when a gesture can be carried as repair or carried as performance. And so again, he is a teacher of conditions. Now, because our episode must be long and braided, we can widen from household disputes to public life again. In many Yoruba accounts, the market is also a moral stage. People arrive carrying their reputations. They arrive carrying their old debts. They arrive carrying the stories people tell about them. And because the market is a crossroads, those stories can change there. Someone who was known as stingy can be generous one day. Someone who was known as careless can become careful. And someone who was known as honest can be tested by the temptation of a quick profit. So let us tell a market story. There is a seller of cloth. Her cloth is not only a product. Cloth carries family identity. Cloth carries ceremony. Cloth carries grief and celebration. And because cloth carries so much, the act of measuring cloth is sacred in a quiet way. The seller measures with a string. The string is her honesty made visible. And one day she considers cutting the string shorter. Not dramatically, only a little. She tells herself it is nothing. And again, we are in the domain of the crossroads. Because only a little is the sentence that unravels trust. In calmer endings, she stops herself. She remembers that the market is not only a place for money. It is a place for reputation. And so she keeps the string true. If you want to place Eshu here, you place him at the moment of temptation. Not as a devil, as a witness. And the witness is a gift because it brings you back to yourself. Now, because we have spoken of cloth, we can return to our muted red-black theme. In the cap story, red and black are two faces of truth. In the cloth story, red and black are two faces of temperament. Red can be the heat of speaking too quickly. Black can be the depth of listening before you answer. So if you are lying awake replaying something you said, you can practice this. Let the red cool. Let the black deepen. And now we can braid in a staff story without turning it into a weapon scene. In museum catalogs and in ritual contexts, there are carved staffs associated with Eshu. We do not need every detail tonight. We only need the bedside meaning. A staff is a tool for walking. It steadies you. It supports your weight. And so, in a story about crossroads, a staff belongs. It says you can move through transitions without falling. And a carved staff also says something else. Power is not abstract. Power is held. And anything held can be held responsibly or carelessly. Again, the crossroads. Now, to keep the deep soak method, we widen the night with a longer, slower image of a crossroads itself. Picture the junction at different times. At dusk, the path is warm. Children pass. Women return from the market. Men carry tools. Later at night, the junction is empty. But empty does not mean inactive. The junction is still a place where meanings gather. And late at night, when the lantern is low, the junction becomes a perfect place for the mind to soften. Because a junction reminds you that you do not have to be moving all the time. You can pause, you can stand, you can wait. And now another micro recap. We are still in the same place. We have only moved through angles, through cloth, through shells, through doorways. And if sleep is arriving, you can let it arrive here. And if you are still awake, we keep braiding. And so we continue.
Hmm.